and welcome to another episode of Coffee with My Friends. This is part 2 of What in the World is Happening 2019. And I hope you had a chance to watch the first part of this because I dealt with what is going on in America. This one I will focus more on what's happening in Israel. And I grab a cup of coffee, I guess, and let's get talking about what's happening in the world right now. So, in my last video, we talked about where are we now. Remember, we're in the third of 4 war cycles, 7-year war cycles. We're in the third war cycle that started in September 24th, 2014. And as you can see from this chart, we are right here, 2019. Pretty far through the war cycle at this point. It started in 2014, we're in 2019. We've only got a couple years to go until the next and final war cycle starts, which is 2021. That's going to be the more intense war cycle, 2021 until 2028, which is when I believe the war cycles themselves will end, and we'll either have the beginning of the tribulation or the establishment of the kingdom of God, one of the two. That's what I think anyway. Always understand, I might be wrong, but God is, so far everything that God has showed me on this is happening, including the intensity of these war cycles like birth pains that started in 2000 in Israel, 2001 in the United States at 9/11. Now, the events we talked about in 2016, 2017 in America, including the United States election of Donald Trump. This is what we talked about in the last video. We talked about the end of America as we know it, the end of America's assignment as the end-time Egypt, and the solar eclipse of Elul 1, which I believe began the judgment of America as end-time Egypt. Remember, we had the first eclipse happened in 2017, and it went across America from west to east. The next eclipse, a total solar eclipse just like it, is going to be in 7 years later, and it's going to go from east to west. Actually goes out through southern part of the U.S. and crosses right in the center of the U.S. in southern Illinois at a place known as Little Egypt. Not a coincidence, I'm telling you. So we also looked at this timeline, and it kind of brought us up to date as where we are in the prophetic timeline. Remember, the war cycles began in 2000, the end of America then, 2016. The corruption of the U.S. corruption, coup, and communism we found in 2017, 2018. The rise of anti-Semitism is now just off the charts. And we have these 2 solar eclipses with 7 years of judgment. The prophetic signs in Israel. These are the things I'm going to look at today. First of all, we'll look at the fig tree producing branches and leaves. Well, what does that mean? Typically, as Christians, we think of the fig tree being the birth of Israel in 1948. I'm not going to argue with that. I think that is a major sign. That is a major fig tree that has blossomed. However, these prophetic events don't just happen and then you dismiss them. In Hebrew thought, things happen over and over again. Things repeat. So I'm going to look at a second prophetic explanation of the fig trees and the leafing of the fig trees and what that might mean for us today. We're going to look at President Trump as a Cyrus, because a lot of people in Israel, the leaders in Israel, are saying that he is a type of Cyrus, or a Cyrus for our day. And Cyrus was the person who actually rebuilt the temple in the times out of Babylonian captivity. So the people of Judah had been carried off into captivity in Babylon, where they were there for 70 years. And then at the end of that time, they were allowed to go back. But it was Cyrus who helped them rebuild and repair the temple. And then finally, the plans to rebuild the temple, what's going on with that right now, the third temple. And finally, we're going to look real briefly at the Middle East peace plan and some of the things that you might not know about that. So let's start out with the fig tree. So we understand in Matthew 24, the fig tree produces branches and leaves, right? Now, everybody's familiar with this prophecy that when you see the fig tree producing branches and leaves, know that this generation will see the end of times, basically. So understanding what is a fig tree first, we need to understand in the ancient Near East, trees were leadership. So it would be including like kings, temple leaders, high priest. So different trees were used symbolically in the Old Testament to represent Israel's leaders. For a good example of that, we have the fig tree, right? A fig tree would be a leader. An almond tree. We're more familiar now with the almond tree. Remember in the Old Testament, they were talking about Aaron, and the group Korah and his group were challenging the leadership of Moses and Aaron. So Korah, the rebellion of Korah, the earth swallowed them up, and they were destroyed. They were swallowed up by the earth. I don't know what happened to them. But anyway, Moses had Aaron take his staff, and all the other leaders of Israel take their staffs. He put them in the tabernacle. And in the morning, Aaron's staff had budded like an almond tree. The almond tree represents a leadership of the priesthood, the high priest. That's a good example of understanding how a tree would be a leader. So we have fig tree, almond tree, and olive tree. These are all different trees that are mentioned in leadership. So I'm going to really focus on the fig tree because in Matthew, it was Jesus, Yeshua, who talked about the fig tree. And I believe it may represent the current leadership in Israel, specifically maybe the Sanhedrin. So let's look at Matthew 24:32, and I'm going to look at this in the Greek rather than just in the English, because I think this is important. It says, "Of now the fig tree, learn the parable. When already the branch of it may have become tender, and the leaves it puts forth, you know that near is the summer." So it doesn't read quite the same in English as it does in Greek, but it's really important to always go back to Greek and Hebrew in really parsing out what is going on with the language here. And I'm going to focus on a couple different words in this, and we're going to look at the Greek. So, first word we're going to look at here in the Greek is the branches. What does it mean? Let's see, what it says here. When the branch of it has become tender and the leaves put forth. So that first word, tender, is hapalos in Greek. And that means the branches are soft, tender. It doesn't necessarily, it can mean it's new, like a new shoot, but also means a softening or a tenderness to it, like a brand new green, soft green branching out, like a new twig, right? The next word I'm looking at is ekfuo, which means those leaves put forth, sprout out. So the leaves are sprouting out. And it's the idea that the leaves are reaching out, right? There's that underlining meaning of that. The reason I think this might refer to the leadership of the Sanhedrin right now. Now the Sanhedrin are soft and tender towards the nations. The Sanhedrin was developed just a few years ago, and it's only in the last year that they have really started reaching out to the nations. Now some of you may have been with me when we did a special concert. We live streamed a concert that happened in Israel. The Sanhedrin sponsored a new day. It's the Day of Creation, the celebration of creation. And they celebrated the 7 days of creation and invited all the nations to join them in celebrating God creating the earth. They had never done this before. Not only did they invite all the nations to join in a live stream, they invited leaders from the different nations to come and be in the audience as well. And some of them did. A couple of different leaders from, I can't remember which country now it was. It was a South American country. Who really feel that they are part of the lost tribes of Israel, which I believe they are too. So it was a wonderful, really prophetic event. Now the leadership of the Sanhedrin and the Temple Institute are finally reaching out to the nations. And this, again, this is something new. This hasn't happened before. So if we look at a tree as a leader, and it could be either leadership as we think of as political leadership or kingship. It also could be the Sanhedrin, which is the temple leadership. That would include the Sanhedrin and the Temple Institute. These are the leaders of the coming temple right now. They're the ones who are really driving to build the third temple. They have finally become soft and tender towards the nations. And they're reaching out and embracing and inviting them to participate in different events. Unprecedented. This has never happened before. So that's why I think this may be a prophetic sign that Jesus was talking about when he talked about when the fig tree reaches out its branches and becomes, sends forth shoots, green shoots. Okay. So now let's look at this verse again that Jesus said from Matthew 24:32 with that in mind. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender, and sprout leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you will know that he is near, right at the door. So we're learning a couple different things here in Matthew 24. The fig tree is the leadership. So when its branches become soft to the nations and sprout leaves, become green and reach out, we know that summer is near. So what is summer? That's another thing I want to look at real quick. By doing that, we're going to look at Luke 21. Now this is the same prophecy that Jesus did, but it's recorded in Luke. It's worded a little bit differently, but I think you'll see that it's really important. This is Luke 21:28 through 30. When these things begin to happen, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Then Jesus told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. Now that's something we haven't really looked at. Is he's saying, yes, the parable of the fig tree, but he also said the parable of all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, know that the kingdom of God is near. So the parable of the trees, there actually is a parable of the trees. I'm not going to go into it today, but it's found in the book of Judges. So that's a whole other study, which is really interesting. But there is actually a parable of the trees, and it has to do with all the different, it's the story of Abimelech, who has come to power, and he has killed the 70 sons of Gideon, and he wants to put himself up as the king. And so they say, well, what do you want to, the olive tree says, come and rule over us. And the olive tree says, oh, why should I leave my good fruit and go rule over the trees? And then they talks about the different trees in the grapevine. And finally the thorn bush rises up and said, I will rule over all the trees. And the thorn bush was Abimelech, who was an evil, like Antichrist figure. Anyway, so that's the parable of the trees, and I'll do another teaching on that because that's really very, very interesting. Has a lot of implications for Matthew 24 and the end times. The thing I want to look at here is know for yourselves that summer is near. So what is summer? Summer is when they have the fruit harvest, the final harvest of summer, and you harvest all the fruit. So you're harvesting the grapes and the olives and the pomegranates. And remember, this is when the olives are, which is considered fruit, are thrown in, and the grapes are thrown in the vat, and they're trampled on. This is the time of summer. It's the dire straits. It's the time between the feasts before Tishri 1. It's typically known, summer is known as a final end time fruit harvest. So what Yeshua would know this. And what he was saying them, look at the parable of the trees. When they sprout leaves, when that fig tree sprouts out, know that summer, the final harvest, is near. So also when you see these things taking place, know that the kingdom of God is near. And that's what we're looking for. The restored kingdom of God on the earth. The kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of God, with Messiah reigning as king. So that's the parable of the fig tree. Hope you found that interesting. I find those things fascinating. I love word studies. You know me, I like word studies. I like to study Hebrew mostly, but Greek also has a lot of cool treasures to find once you get in and understand the meaning of the words. So now let's look at Trump as Cyrus. In 2018, President Trump officially moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. This is really important because multiple presidents have promised to move the embassy and place it in Jerusalem. I'm going to declare that Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but not one president has fulfilled that promise. President Trump is the first president to actually move the embassy. This was a really big deal. So that happened in 2018. Now, President Trump also supports the building of the third temple as a house of prayer for all nations. The Jewish people now, especially a lot of the leadership and the rabbis, are looking at Trump as an end-time Cyrus. So as I said before, Cyrus was the one who helped them build the temple. And Trump is the first president who truly is supporting them in that. So moving the embassy to Jerusalem was the first step in his support of Jerusalem as the capital, the eternal capital of the Jewish people of Israel. The next thing would be he supports the building of the third temple. Now he wants to, I think he's trying to call it a house of prayer for all nations, which is fine because that's what it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations. And he is actually in negotiations right now for control of the Temple Mount. He's the master negotiator, remember. He's always creating a good deal for whoever he's negotiating for. So it'll be a good deal for Israel, it'll be a good deal for the Palestinians. He wants to negotiate a good deal for everybody. That's what he does. It's his tagline. And he actually is working on doing this. So we see Trump rising up like a Cyrus. And again, that's kind of an important prophetic thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about the third temple. Guess what? The third temple, I believe, is going to be built. There's lots of different opinions about this. This is my opinion. I've studied enough now, and I understand that history repeats itself. And one of the more important things I've understood about the third temple being here is that Jesus, when he was talking in Matthew 24, it was during the time of Hanukkah. And I believe he was saying, Hanukkah is going to happen again. Right? So history in Jewish history repeats itself. Hanukkah happening again is the temple was had been rebuilt by Cyrus, but it was defiled by the Greeks. And there was that was the story of the Maccabees, where they rose up and they kicked the Greeks out, and they had to cleanse the temple and reinstitute actual temple worship again. I believe that may happen again. So if there is a third temple that is built, which I believe it will be, it will either be defiled, which I think is the leading argument, that somehow that temple is defiled. Most people think it's going to be a statue of the Antichrist in the Holy of Holies. I personally don't hold that belief because I don't believe the Jewish people would allow that. But I think there is going to be some takeover of the temple of a mix of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, some kind of an end-time religion like Chrislam that's risen up. But this some type of a new religion that combines all three will take over the temple, and they'll place something that will be an abomination in the temple or in the Holy of Holies, or somehow to defile that. That will trigger the coming of Messiah. And the Messiah comes to regain control of the land. That's one of the assignments of Messiah. Now, we think as Christians in the past, we've always think of when Jesus comes, he's just going to come as king. They're going to rapture all his people out, and then he'll come and he'll reign as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But we don't understand what that means. We have to understand the role of Messiah in the Jewish perspective. Okay? So the Jewish role of Messiah, his assignment is to regather the 12 tribes, which is something he needs to do. He needs to reestablish the kingdom of Israel after all the 12 tribes are regathered. He's going to either cleanse or rebuild the temple. He makes sure he establishes the temple and reinstitutes the sacrifices, turning the authority of the priesthood back to the priests. And then he has to defeat Amalek, which is Israel's traditional enemies. That spirit of Amalek can be found pretty much now in Islam, modern-day Islam. So those are the 4 assignments of Messiah. So when I say that this end-time defilement is going to trigger the coming of Messiah, I believe that Yeshua will come as a commander of the armies, as the king like David, a conquering king, who will come and regain control of the land, of Jerusalem, of the Temple Mount, of the temple, and reestablish the kingdom. So when Messiah comes, he will either cleanse or rebuild the temple. It depends on if the temple is simply defiled or if it is somehow destroyed in the battles. And I'm not going to speculate on that right now. A couple different scenarios. So the third temple, but that's actually in process now. They're negotiating to build the third temple. And I'll tell you why and how. So the Middle East peace plan is key to this. Right now, President Trump has tagged Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. So Jared Kushner is negotiating for President Trump. He is the person who's working with all the different leadership. He's talked to the Palestinians who are not willing to cooperate. He's talked with Jordan, who now controls the Temple Mount, but is not willing to relinquish any other control of the temple or allow worship on the Temple Mount by the Jewish people. So Jordan is not cooperating at this point. And so he's negotiating with all these different players. Right now, he is looking at a two-state solution, possibly with Jordan as the Palestinian state. And that's the way it was originally set up in 1948 or 1947. Originally, during the Balfour Declaration, Transjordan, which encompassed the current nation of Israel and Jordan, was a large, large state, was owned by the British. And they wanted to create a Jewish state. The Arabs at the time were very upset about that, so the British came up with a two-state solution. The nation of Jordan for the Arabs, or for Muslims, and the nation of Israel for the Jews. That was the original two-state solution. And the Jews agreed with that. The Arabs did not, so we had the battles of 1948, where Israel was established as a nation. Well, what they're thinking is going back to that original two-state solution, with Jordan now as the home for the Palestinians. I think that makes a lot of sense. So we'll see how that plays out. The other thing that Jared Kushner, I think, is negotiating is to take control of the Temple Mount away from Jordan and give it to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has become very, very friendly to both the U.S. and to Israel. So he's looking at Saudi Arabia taking control of the Temple Mount. That could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. I'm not quite sure how long Saudi Arabia will be cooperative. Let's just say it that way. It may be a good thing to take Jordan's control off the Temple Mount and give it to Saudi Arabia. I think ultimately, though, my personal opinion, that's going to end up badly for Israel. I don't think Saudi Arabia will keep their promises on the long term. We'll see. And then finally, they're talking about dividing Jerusalem with two capitals, the capitals for the Jewish nation and a capital for the Palestinian nation. Again, I'm not a fan of dividing Jerusalem at all. So we'll see if this plays out and how it plays out. We'll have to watch this carefully. I think if they divide Jerusalem, that is going to bring judgment as well. Don't want to do that. So that's kind of an update on Israel right now. Next, I want to look at what should we look for, what's coming up, right? Because right now we have increasing war in Israel because, as I mentioned in the last video, currently Gaza has been attacking Israel. They've shot 600 rockets and missiles into Israel, causing rather great destruction and death. Israel is retaliating now. They're talking about sending in ground troops. I don't know yet if that's happened. We'll have to do Facebook Lives to kind of keep you posted on this. And if they do that, then Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is north of Israel, has promised to attack as well. So these are all Iranian proxies. This is the ancient nation of Persia, the ancient enemy of Israel, who's also attacking through Hezbollah and Hamas. Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and we have Syria. Turkey's playing into all this. Turkey, the president of Turkey is now weighing in and condemning Israel for their defending themselves. So we have all these different players in play right now. So what should we look for? I think we have 2 more years of preparation. Again, the next war cycle starts in Tishri 1, September, October. It's the fall feast of 2021. That's the shriveled wheat, right? So we have till 2021, a couple of years, a little more than 2 years to prepare for that. I believe Elijah at some point is going to appear, maybe in the desert of Israel or in Jerusalem, I'm not sure where, but he will call us and begin to gather the 12 tribes back to the land. I think we need to watch for Elijah, or an Elijah-type figure who comes and warns people of the coming judgment, warns people of the coming attack upon the nations, both America and Israel. Europe's already just about lost to Islam. So Elijah, I think, will arise, or an Elijah-type figure. We need to watch for that. And I believe that will trigger the second exodus out of the nations. So that will begin at some point in the next few years. I think we need to watch for the U.S. becoming an end-time Babylon. Right now we've been acting as an Egypt. But remember, in 2016, our assignment as an end-time Egypt ended. What are we going to do now? Maybe become an end-time Babylon. That would include a globalist takeover. So there's an attempt by the globalists to create a one-world government, and they want to absorb the U.S. into this. That would be a Babylonian globalist takeover. And they're right now in partnership with radical Islam. Again, there are many peaceful Muslims, but the radical jihadists are not peaceful. And they are also committed to a one-world government. Ultimately, what we should look for is Yeshua to come and gather us out of the nations back to either the deserts of Jordan, the southern part of Israel. There will be a gathering place where he will gather us all, prepare us for the final 7-year tribulation, where we'll have a place of safety, or we'll be part of the end-time battles and the establishment of the kingdom. Kingdom of Messiah, that's what we all want. Now, so for more information on this, if I've kind of triggered some thought for you and you're thinking, wow, I really would like to learn some of the things that you're talking about, go to my website, coffeewithmyfriends.com, and you can watch more. I teach a lot on the end times, and I have taught a lot about it. I would say go back and review what in the world is happening. The previous ones that I did back in 2 years ago, so 2016, 2017. Watch the Blood Moon Update Conference. It explains the blood moons and what they mean. Watch the 4 Horses of Revelation. That explains the rise of radical Islam. And finally, there's an in-depth study that I did called The Restoration. And it's the coming of Messiah and the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. It's a study of the book of Numbers, of all things, because the book of Numbers in Hebrew is Bamidbar, in the wilderness. So I found a lot of underlying prophetic meaning when you study the Hebrew of the book of Numbers that tie in and give us clues as to the restoration of the kingdom by Messiah when he comes in the end of days. Well, I hope you enjoyed this update. I'll try to do more of these as things are happening and give you more long-term teachings like this to keep you informed on where we are in the war cycles, where we are in the coming of Messiah, what's happening in America and in Israel, and how it relates to the end of days. Be blessed, and I'll talk to you soon. Shalom.